Hello guys, good morning. This is your Sir Kevin again, and today in our accounting tutorial, we're going to talk about business combinations. Today I'm going to share with you about goodwill computation at the date of acquisition. So let's get to it. This problem we have here is rather a simple problem, ano? It is between Sheldon Corporation and Missy Company. So what happened here is that Sheldon acquired 8,000 of the 10,000 outstanding ordinary shares of Missy Company. So here, 80% ownership si Sheldon over Missy Company. Missy will become Sheldon's subsidiary. He did this by paying the shareholders 1 million cash. So binili natin ng 8,000 shares from the shareholders, paying them 1 million cash. The net assets of Missy at fair value were 1,200,000. Okay, so us being equity holders, the net assets or assets minus liability equity, ito yung possible na matatanggap natin multiplied by 80% if ever Missy were to dissolve. However, let's go to requirements muna. Under each of the following assumptions, compute the amount of goodwill. Okay, so number 1 and number 2, actually nire-require dito is goodwill. Number 3 is only added as a clarification. So let's read that first. At what amount will the NCI be recognized if the problem is silent as to its fair value or proportionate option? Okay, background. NCI, non-controlling interest, is optionally valued at either fair value or proportionate. So ngayon daw, sinasabi ni number 3, what if silent ang problem? Take note, optionally ha, option. What if silent ang problem as to choosing between fair value or proportionate? Alin daw ang pipiliin natin? We'll get to that in our solution. So, again, dalawa lang ang given. Meron kang acquisition cost, 1 million, at meron kang FINA, 1,200,000. Let us go into our solution. So here you have, guys, a solution guide for computing the problem between Sheldon and Missy. It is that Sheldon acquired Missy for 1 million cash and Missy's net assets at fair value is 1,200,000. So as you can observe here, we have a 3-column format. Ito po, 100%, 80%, and 20% columns. And then you have their description, acquisition cost, FINA, and goodwill. Well, acquisition cost minus FINA equals goodwill. That should be our basic concept in goodwill computation. However, let's get to the problem now. So the acquisition cost is 1 million, but the 1 million is only acquiring 80% controlling interest. So we will have to input the 1 million on the 80% column. So let me explain first. The way this computation works is when you compute goodwill, the amount to be recognized as goodwill should be on the 100% column. Kung ano ang maipipresent natin dito on this particular cell. However, knowing na 80% lang ang inacquire natin, it is just right that we input the acquisition cost over there. So here is something that you should observe. Ang goodwill computation in acquisition of ordinary shares is not only influenced by the controlling interest. Sometimes, your NCI, the 20%, will also have an effect on goodwill. How does that happen? Let us observe. So, FINA, as given, is 1,200,000. But the problem vaguely states Missy's net assets has a fair value of 1,200,000, di ba? That means the 1,200,000 is the entire net assets of Missy. So that means it is on the 100% column. Okay? Sabi kasi, in that problem, the net assets of Missy at fair value were 1,200,000. So that statement there would give us a hint that this 1,200,000 is 100% of the net assets. Pero guys, know that we only acquired 8,000 over 10,000. That means our share over that 1,200,000 is only 960,000. So if we would go back to our solution, the 1,200,000 is not actually the amount of net assets that can be attributed to Sheldon, but only 80% of that. We will have to compute it like this. 1,200,000 multiplied by 80%, 960. And in that, if we are going to follow the ordinary principle of goodwill computation, which is acquisition cost minus FINA, we would arrive at an amount equal to 40,000. Okay, ito na po ngayon ang effect ng NCI over goodwill. Itong nakukompute natin na 40,000 goodwill, that only relates to the 80% of the business combination. But do take note na in this business combination, ang mangyayari po, si Missy and si Sheldon magiging isa. So when you prepare the consolidated financial statements, you must consider all the components of Missy, controlling interest, and non-controlling interest. So, ang gagawin mo dito in computing your goodwill is first you have to determine the valuation of NCI. So, as mentioned earlier, NCI, non-controlling interest, can be valued at either fair value or proportionate. Actually, ang nire-require sa atin, what is goodwill if NCI is at fair value and what is goodwill if NCI is at proportionate? Kasi po, magkakaroon ng impact kung anong amount ang maipipresent natin sa goodwill if we value NCI at either. So, let's talk about fair value. What's fair value of NCI? Well, NCI is actually shares not held by Sheldon, diba? So when we say fair value of NCI, it's actually pertaining to fair value of the shares outside, held by outside parties. So kung bibilhin natin ang shares na yan held by outside parties, the fair value input that we would need primarily is you are going to look for market values. The first question you must ask is there a given market value for the NCI? Ulit, kung fair value ang maging option, your first choice is if there is a market value for the shares. Kung meron, jackpot ka dyan. Kung wala, you will have another problem. If there are no market values given in the problem, which is we determined earlier, wala naman kasi ito lang ang given sa problem, di ba? Dalawa lang. No mention about NCI at all. Going back, if there is no market value given, you have an alternative option, which we call implied fair value. IFV, implied fair value. Now, this implied fair value is derived from acquisition cost actually. The formula for implied fair value is acquisition cost divided by controlling interest percentage and then multiply that by non-controlling interest percentage. So it's like this. The mentality of this formula is if I can buy 80% at 1 million, how much will I need to pay if I want to buy 20% only? Or let's say, kung nabili ko ang 80% for only 1 million, magkano sana ang additional na babayaran ko kung binili ko na lang din pati yung 20% para 100% na ako? Magkano ang babayaran? So 80%, I was able to buy for 1 million. If I were to buy 100%, how much do I pay? You just do a simple ratio and proportion. 1 million is to 80, blank is to 100. So if I divide 1 million by 80%, I would get the 100%, di ba? And if I would multiply that 100% by the NCI percentage, I would get the amount I need to pay in order to acquire NCI. And that is implied fair value now. So, doing the computation, I would have to get acquisition cost, divide it by the controlling interest, and multiply now by non-controlling interest. NCI at fair value is 250,000. And to answer requirement 1, if NCI is at fair value, your goodwill will look like this. Goodwill is acquisition cost minus FINA, itong amount na to. But this amount was not known earlier kasi po, the way this computation works is acquisition cost, the total here is equal to the actual acquisition cost plus NCI. And this cell here is actually equal to 1 million plus 250 NCI. Okay? That would mean na kung magko-compute ako ng goodwill, I will have to deduct 1,250,000 minus 1,200,000. A resulting goodwill of 50,000. If I am going to value NCI at fair value, the amount of goodwill is 50,000. And that is because if I would complete the computation, the share in FINA of the NCI would be 240,000. That makes NCI have a share in goodwill as well. The thing about fair value NCI is that ang goodwill po hindi lang manggagaling sa controlling interest. Magkakaroon din po ng goodwill ang NCI natin. Okay? So, answer for requirement 1, you have 50,000. Well, actually, this solution, kaya ko na ma-answeran yung requirement number 2. Pero let's do this properly. What if NCI was valued at proportionate share? I-assign ko na amount dito is proportionate share. Proportionate share. To get proportionate share, ang formula po natin dito is FINA multiplied by NCI percentage. Simple as that. FINA multiplied by NCI. Does that sound familiar? Yes po. Ang proportionate NCI is actually 240,000. And if I were to prove that, I will have this computation. FINA multiplied by NCI percentage, which is 20%. That's the same amount we had earlier, 240,000. And yes, ang gagawin mo lang po sa proportionate NCI is you are going to get this amount and carry it up to the acquisition row. So, 240 ka din dito. So, what happens kung ang NCI natin is valued at proportionate share? Ang magiging goodwill mo po is equal to 40,000. Does that look familiar? Yes, sir. That amount is identical simply to the controlling interest column. So in short, actually kanina nakuha na natin yung answer for requirement number 2. But the purpose of this solution is just to prove to you na ang goodwill po is magiging 40,000 if the NCI is going to be valued at proportionate share. Yon. But here's an additional rule that you should observe with NCI valuation. NCI cannot be assigned an amount lower than its share in FINA. So in short, hindi natin pwede i-assign ang amount ng NCI na lower than 240,000. That is strictly provided in our IFRS 3 standard. Bawal ka mag-assign ng amount lower than 240,000. So kahit nasabihin sa problem na ang NCI is measured at fair value, pero mas higher si proportionate kaysa sa fair value, you will have to assign 240. Okay? So let's do a little wrap up. If I were to revert the solution back to fair value, which is 250 kanina, di ba? Fair value. Ito yung magiging itsura ng problem natin. Well, actually, with this solution, you can already answer two different scenarios. Scenario number 1. If NCI is valued at fair value, the goodwill would be 50,000. We call this one full goodwill. Scenario number 2, if NCI is going to be valued at proportionate, goodwill would be equal to 40,000, which is actually equal to what we had earlier. Dito, we call that partial goodwill. And there's more. Pag tinanong din sa'yo magkano ang NCI, ang answer po nasa solution na din natin. Which, kinompute natin kanina, di ba? This one is actually pertaining to our fair value NCI. And the amount below that, the 240,000, is already the computed value of your proportionate NCI. Yon. So you answered four possible requirements with just one solution. Now, isn't that nice? So your key takeaways for today, goodwill can either be full or partial. And they are dependent if whether ang NCI natin is fair value or proportionate. Kailangan mo lang tandaan na ang kapares palagi ni full goodwill is fair value NCI. And the partner of partial goodwill is proportionate NCI. So to color code that properly, dito po, saka ito. So that ends our lesson for today, guys. Stay tuned for more business combination tips. I'll see you again in our next video. Bye-bye.